Hello, it's me, here to defend that thing you hate. I'm just kidding, but I am gonna spend a whole bunch of time talking about an even smaller UI decision in an even more controversial game mechanic. I can't help it. I just have so much love to give. So here's a question. What do you do as a UI designer if someone hands you a system that is probably going to make players sad? But you can't remove that thing. That's not your job. You just have to try to communicate that system to the player. Well, you, UI designer, are the last emotional line of defense between game and player. Can you help the player be less sad? Using buttons? And text box? Tools of the trade? Don't be sad, please. Pat, pat. Here's a quick case study where UI designers were given exactly that kind of system, and one teeny tiny choice they made, which I think was pretty smart. Not perfect, but smart. And the coolest part is that on the surface, it seems to me like a terrible idea. Okay, let's go. So Breath of the Wild is our big shiny fave. It's shiny, it's very shiny. Why is it so shiny? And the most controversial part of the game when it came out was somehow not the blinding specular lighting that makes wet rocks look like plastic. Oh god, my eyes! No, it was the breakable weapons system. Weapon disposability is the design decision my friends most frequently disparage when they pick up Breath of the Wild. Never before had a Zelda game encouraged the player to be so cavalier with their weapons. You might get new ones. Finding the Master Sword was always a staple, of course. Or you might upgrade the ones you already have, or the game might take them away from you to make sure you really appreciate them. And the series has always had disposable items like bombs or arrows or fairies, but scavenging weapons only to have them break in your hands during combat was new. And to a lot of people, it felt weird. Bad weird. This is a Zelda game. You don't just throw your sword. Sword is friend. I'm not going to try to convince you that disposable weapons themselves were a good or bad design choice. I like them, personally. They grew on me. What I am going to focus on is one little way the UI designers chose to communicate about weapons, and why I think it's brilliant. Because here's the thing about UI design. Oftentimes, a UI designer doesn't get to decide how the thing works. You just get handed a decision, and you need to figure out how to communicate that decision to the player. Design is sort of an overloaded term in the industry. Have you heard the terms UX design and UI design? You know, UX, UI, user experience, user interface, sometimes lumped together as UI UX, UX UI, UXWI. UX is a superset of UI. All software has UX. Everything has UX, from door handles to Disney World. It deals with how the user interprets and navigates the game's presentation, but also more broadly, how the game feels to play from moment to moment, minute to minute, hour to hour. UI design is a very small subset of UX design. Just look at this extremely helpful diagram. Get it now? No? How about this one? Who's making these? Okay, it's not that important. We're gonna move on. Okay, one more. All right, here's one you could actually read, just as a treat. Okay. UI design is a very small subset of UX design, and it's still huge. It covers all this. All of this. Things like button maps, item tooltips, health bars, dialogue flows, inventory screens, confirmation selectors, press A to climb, press L to drop an apple on the ground, change a horse from blue to brown, rainy weather, mini maps, press a button, take a nap, menus, pop-ups, arrows, arcs and settings, boxes, bars and clocks and indicators, heart containers, every single Power Ranger. There's a lot going on in a game, and it's the UI designer's job to take decisions made about how the game functions and how the player should interpret that functionality and communicate that back to the player to allow them to make informed decisions. And more than that, to help manage their emotional state while playing. You know the bad version of this. Oh god, time's running out, you need to buy the gems. Oh no, oh put in your credit card info quick. That kind of emotional management. Should the player feel tense? Powerful, relaxed, rushed, like they need to give you all their money? So, how should the player feel about the disposable weapon system? The full user experience surrounding the weapon system is this, 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 and this. It's a lot, and there are a lot of feelings associated with it. Power, capability, intrigue, excitement, all that good open world RPG happy stuff. But for some players, those other feelings were overshadowed by this part of the user experience. To them, this moment felt irredeemably negative. And yeah, that's where UI designers become the last line of defense. What can we tell players to help them make decisions within a system that is likely to cause negative emotions like loss, decision anxiety, or choice paralysis? The UI designers were not going to be able to fix that. That's not within their power. So here's what the UI designers did do about weapon disposability. They did this. And this. Let me explain why I think this is great. When you're comparing your held weapon to a weapon on the ground, a little up or down indicator will appear to immediately signify, will this new weapon deal more or less damage per swing than the one I'm currently holding? Which is extremely limited. This simple stat comparison is far from the only thing a player needs to consider when swapping out weapons. Do they want a weapon that can burn? Do they want a two-handed weapon or a one-handed weapon? Different weapons have different durabilities. And this Korok leaf has a damage value of 1, so it will almost always be worse than what you're holding, so you will always see this next to its name. But you don't grab a Korok leaf to hit people with it. You grab it to steer a boat. And you grab a torch to light a cauldron. And this magic wand has a terrible damage stat, but that's because you aren't supposed to swing it. You're supposed to use the throw button to shoot magic missiles. Of course it's worse if you just swing it around like a club. That's not what it's for. One could say that these little up or down arrows, by evaluating the weapon objectively across a single numerical stat, could cheapen or diminish the uniqueness of the weapons and make them more disposable. And yeah, this UI choice does cheapen the weapon, so you can make at-a-glance decisions in the middle of combat. Down, skip. Up, gimme. You can spend less time stressing about each weapon as something precious and indispensable. The UI is telling you to compare them quite simplistically. They are supposed to feel disposable. The core of the combat experience of Breath of the Wild relies on the player not getting emotionally attached to their weapons, being okay with them breaking, swapping them out when something better comes along. Whether or not you think the game fully achieves this, I do think it was brilliant to use the UI to instill in the weapons an air of cheapness, reducing them visually to up, down, or neutral, tools that serve a purpose, in my opinion, gels with the combat system, producing an emotionally consistent experience. Because it's so counterintuitive that you'd want to make anything in your game feel cheap. Ironically, I think this framing of the weapons as cheap, disposable, and easy to compare made me feel more competent with the depth of the weapon system as I transcended the framework provided for me by the UI. Remember, any UI has to serve multiple audiences. It has to orient the players who are new to your game, but it shouldn't get in the way of second and third time players. It has to feel understandable to players who have never touched a game before, while not feeling condescending to players who've been playing games for their whole lives. I feel like this simple stat comparison sets a great baseline for the player to quickly latch onto and later build off of as they become more familiar with the game. The baseline numerical comparison, will this increase or reduce my immediate damage output, gives them the most basic information they need to make decisions about their arsenal and start to get a feeling of progression. Constantly triggering that, ooh, a better weapon response, and getting them hooked on the feeling of exploring new areas with better stuff. As they get a feel for each weapon, though, building familiarity, developing preferences, they start to attach new associations on their own. I'd start to remember, ooh, yeah, I like the way this one swings, or, oh right, wands are fun, I should grab this wand. And that proficiency felt like it was coming from me, not from the UI. The UI was a platform, which I eventually climbed on top of and stood on as I reached higher and higher on my own. It also gave me little moments of discovery every time I picked up a new weapon that behaved differently from what I expected. I started to get a feel for which weapons I should use to break rocks, which weapons I wanted to use in different combat scenarios, and which ones I could just, leave on the ground. I learned all this by playing rather than being told. Interestingly, we see the trade-off between simplicity and specificity here. If you do a quick search, you'll find multiple players going online to ask, hey, what stat is this arrow giving me information about? I personally just intuited that it was talking about damage, but a player who's more focused on this moment, this extremely memorable moment, might assume it was talking about durability. Does this weapon on the ground have more or fewer hits left in it than the one you're currently holding? That's not an unreasonable guess. Personally, I would have preferred if weapon durability remained constant. I don't think having it vary from weapon to weapon was necessary, and I never developed much of an intuitive feel for it. And I am the kind of player who absolutely refuses to go into the item info. But think of how it would have changed things if the game had displayed more information on these weapons as you passed over them. Durability, handedness, material, etc. All relevant information, all good to know. Imagine if the game had presented all of this with equal importance. Imagine trying to make decisions on the fly with 4 different stat icons competing for your attention. Alternatively, imagine if this arrow hadn't been there at all, if the UI had given no information other than the name. I think either of these decisions would have made the weapon system way more overwhelming for new players, but for 2 totally different reasons. The first would have sent a message that choosing between weapons is an important choice that should be mulled over, considered so carefully, which doesn't gel with the experience of the rest of the mechanic. And the second would have sent new players totally adrift. I do think this could have been a fully intuitive system, and it didn't quite reach that. And I do think there could have been more ways to mitigate player frustration without removing breakable weapons entirely. There are flaws in both the UX and the UI that I'm excited to see addressed, hopefully, in Tears of the Kingdom. Unlike some folks, I don't think that breakable weapons are inherently flawed. I just think that the emotional lows in a game experience not primed to accommodate those negative feelings need to be managed a bit more thoughtfully. But for my part, I thought this UI was pretty clever. The minimal UI allows the weapon system to operate more on the basis of feel, and for the player to develop a personal feeling of proficiency with it over time. When UI goes out of its way to signify something, it paints that thing as important. By signifying as few things as possible, the UI tries to tell you, don't think too hard about this. It's a sword. Grab people and hit it with them. Smackity smack smack smack. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, it would help me oh so much if you would take the time to hit the like button and leave a comment. That's one of the ways YouTube decides if it should show my videos to other people. Design is highly subjective, so of course, if you disagree with my evaluation, let me know in the comments. Politely, please. I've got more videos on Game Uxui that'll be showing up on screen somewhere. Check them out. And finally, thanks a bunch to the members of my Patreon. Every video I get closer to being able to do this for a living, and I appreciate all of you supporting that work. I will see you all next time.